Hi, my name is Makayla. I'm the Civics and Community Engagement Director here at CHS. My pronouns are she, her.
Hi, I'm Venus Agbadan. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Civics and Community Engagement Chair of Cheltenham High School Student Council. And welcome to Cheltenham Student Activism Showcase.
Okay, the purpose of this event is basically to just hear student voices and to spark new conversations and continue talking about the important events here at our school.
Although the discussions that we're going to have to hear today are important and deserve to be had, we also want to remind everyone here that what's even more important is after these discussions to go out and be inspired to take action on the issues we discussed today.
Okay, so before we begin the event, I'm just going to start with a quick Lenape land acknowledgement. The Lenape people lived in harmony with another. Upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were moved west and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical and communities of the region. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of the Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tanamend that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land.
Just a quick overview of how each panel will work today. We're going to be alternating between prepared questions that we have gotten from students at CHS and live questions. So if anyone on this call has a question for our panelists at any time, feel free to type it in the chat and we will get to them in order as time permits.
Okay, so we'd just like to thank any school board members and CHS faculty for joining us today.
We also want to give a shout out to all the local officials that are joining us. Senator Art Haywood, I think the County Commissioner Daniel Norris is going to join us, and also all the school board members and admin that helped us today. But yeah.
Okay, so let's get started. I'm gonna share it, Venus.
Sorry, the first panel is consisting of 3 groups. The first group is Poetry Club. Poetry Club was founded in 2017. It's made to create a space for students, especially students of color, to express themselves, their emotions, and their hardships through poetry. Students write and prepare poetry during this club and ultimately have a poetry slam at the end of the year. And they also host other fundraisers such as open mic night. And this club participates in social activism in the way that they allow students to freely write whatever they please. And as a result, discussions of topics such as sexuality, racism, individuality, and mental health occur. And they give students a safe space to express these feelings.
Okay, so the next group we have today is Black Scholars. It was founded by Mr. Metcalf in 2010, and their meetings are centered around current political and social issues that affect the Black community. They study Black historical figures and current Black community leaders. Their members engage in activities and lessons regarding Black history and culture. They've organized a successful Black Lives Matter protest and a local poster pasting project, a social media with over 180 followers, and a local recruitment bank, watch parties, and they've worked at voting polls. This group promotes and sustains a social environment where Black excellence is recognized and appreciated as a testament to the diverse range of manners in which Black people have excelled despite facing immense systematic obstacles, particularly in the US education system. This group creates a space community for like-minded Black students to engage with one another and further their knowledge of their community as a whole. Okay, so the next group we have today are the NAACP ambassador leaders. The first ambassador leaders meeting took place in 2020 at CHS. So this group recognizes students who've used their voice in the school community to create discussion about social justice issues. Meetings are centered around how to achieve racial equity and how to foster a school environment that makes POC feel heard and supported. This group also aims to adjust the curriculum and school environment to promote education equity for marginalized groups.
Amazing. So let's get started on the first panel. So, Makayla, would you like to ask the first question?
Yeah, give me 1 second. Just gonna pull up the questions. Okay, so CSD likes to pride itself in its diversity, but personally, Shonham has taught me that despite having a diverse student body, diversity does not equal equity. In what ways do you wish Shonham would explore the complexity of its diversity and support the students that make it diverse, rather than just proclaiming its diversity?
And if any students have anything to say, again, just write stack in the chat and we'll call on you.
So I feel for kids of color, making it known that they are able and should take AP classes and honor classes is one of the biggest things we could do to increase our equity in our school. And we've been trying to do that. I know one of the things that was recently changed in our school was to take away the form that said like if you were to sign up for an AP class and it was not recommended for you to do it by a previous teacher, then you had to fill out a form that said like against the school, you're saying that you should do this. And I knew that was taken away, and I think that's one step in the right direction to allowing students of color, giving them the purpose and giving them the purpose that they feel that they should have to take these classes and be involved in these type of higher education classes.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of times our school can feel like two separate schools because of the gap between Black students in AP classes versus enrichment honors classes. So that's a great way to improve the equity in our school. Anyone else have anything to add to that?
I'll just add that I believe it also starts like earlier than high school, and I feel like a lot of people on these gifted courses were like breeded for them, like starting in like elementary school. I remember there was like this exam we had to take, so I just know that to create a more equitable like high school experience, or just any school experience, it really starts young. And like I feel like the school within a school, like that divide, it starts pretty early on in the township.
Alexis, I saw you unmuted. Did you have something to say?
Oh yeah, I was actually gonna say what Joelle just said, because like I started off when I first started in Cheltenham as well, like some classes I had were gifted, but other classes, teachers told me that I couldn't be in those classes. And the only reason that I started taking AP classes and honors classes was because a Black teacher that I had actually singled me out and talked to my parents. And I feel like it's probably something that could be nice for Black students to have people of color on the school board who can mentor them or actually single them out, because it sometimes it doesn't feel like we've since the beginning, we haven't had that in the school board, like helping us. So I feel like that's something that could really help people of color when encouraging them to go into more honors classes, because it's not really it seems like it's not something that can be changed. Like after you've been in the school district for so long and you've been taking the same classes, it's not really encouraged to move up.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You definitely need to have a teacher, or people don't make it that far without somebody advocating for them. So we need the school as a whole to advocate for these students.
To answer your comment in the chat, Ms. Haywood, I think it is true that you no longer need a recommendation, or you need a recommendation to get into the class, but you no longer need to like sign a form if you're like going against your teacher's recommendation. That's like one step in the right direction, but it's still a tricky situation in some ways.
The transition from enriched classes to AP or honors classes can be difficult for some students, especially if in the past you haven't been encouraged to take higher level courses.
And with the ambassador group, one of the things we did last year when we were still in person is Metcalf identified students who were doing very well in their eighth grade years. And he brought their teachers in, or sorry, he brought their parents in for a meeting, and the ambassadors, like the students who were in AP honors classes, talked to the parents and told them about the honors class or the AP classes and what they're like and how to prepare for them. And many of the parents even said like, oh, that would have never been on my radar to sign them up for AP classes to make sure they were taking AP classes. And I just think it shows that, yeah, like what you guys were saying, the younger levels, at the younger stages of school, kids of color aren't pushed at all to pursue that rigorous academics. And so I think we also need to enlighten the parents on these classes and how to take these courses and how to sign up for them, so they can help their kids get into the classes they need to.
Yeah, I agree. I think arming parents of students of color with the information they need to take their students push their students is a really important part of creating equity in our school district. Does anyone else have anything to add? Okay, saying nothing, move on to the next question. Recently, groups such as Police Free CSD have popped up all over our county, including in our own school district. How does police presence negatively impact Black students at CHS, especially their mental health? River?
I know that there's an element of intimidation that accompanies police presence and just overall hypersecurity within our schools, especially for Black students. I think this exists in the form of like the criminalization of like Black youth. And I know that our staff works like really hard to ensure that people feel safe. And I know that as Americans, we're like used to relying on police for protection, but I know for some Black students that that's not the case, and that kind of like the adultifying us and just like assuming that we're not high schoolers, you know. And I know this varies from staff to staff, and it's not all staff, but I think that also contributes to a level of like fear and like the higher rates of expulsion and suspension among Black and brown students. And it's something that needs to end. And to do this, I believe we need to expand our mental health resources, because there is an element of trauma that happens from policing, and kind of those mental health resources can mobilize Black students to be more encouraged to like feel safer emotionally, and then also be in a better emotional state to pursue like higher level classes, and also feel safer when they're like walking down the hallways and stuff. And of course, we have well-meaning security guards, but personally, I do believe there are better restorative practices and methods to help teenagers in our schools to be better students and scholars in general. Thank you.
Yeah, that was, oh, sorry, Makayla, what were you saying?
No, I wasn't going to say anything. I was just going to say I agree with that.
Yeah, this is a big thing we talked about in our group too. And we also, I feel like we have to take account of students' previous lives or where they've been before, and maybe their encounters with police that might not have been too good. And to walk into a building where you think is safe, where you think you're here to get an education, and you walk in, the first thing you see, one of the first things you see is a police officer in uniform, that can strike someone's anxiety. It can strike someone's fear, because you don't know what they've been through. And to show that level of kind of disregard for the students is quite big, and it promotes not a learning environment. It promotes a environment for where it's about structure. It's about keeping everybody in line when there actually isn't that. There's not that need for that presence. And we talked about, I feel like social workers, counselors are much more effective and have the training than police officers and safety officers, because, and we constantly say we have all these safety officers and we're saying we're giving them the training, but you shouldn't have to. This role is already made. It's called a social worker. It's called a counselor. There's no reason to take someone who was not trained to do that and who doesn't really want to do that and trying to train them to be someone they're not, when that role is already a thing. So I feel like you should just be hiring more social workers and counselors than trying to retrofit a safety officer as that role. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point. I think a lot of times we forget that the interaction students have with police outside of school really does affect the interactions they have with them inside of school and how they see them. Anyone else have anything to add?
I was just going to say, I also agree that it's definitely something that we should look at, especially as we go back to school in the future, because as police brutality, it's starting to become way more mainstream now and a part of the media than it was before. So for people of color, especially in our school, a lot of people of color, their backgrounds might come from people who have been in prison, or they hear stories from families and stuff. But now that it's more mainstream, it's extended to our entire community within Cheltenham now, because now we all see it. It's not something that is just like individuals in our school. So it's probably not going to be any person of color who is going to say that they are 100% safe with having police officers in our school. So I feel like it's definitely something that should be emotionally dealt with for our students as we go back into the building. That's all.
Okay, does anybody else have anything to add? I definitely agree with that, Alexis. But does anybody have anything else to add or any other questions before we move on to the next one? Okay, so I'll take that as a no. So the next question is, does it ever feel like discipline is prioritized over education at CHS? If so, why does it feel that way, and what can we do for that to change?
I think so. I think sometimes it is. sometimes within a classroom, I feel that the dynamic is off, or sometimes not even the dynamic. Sometimes it's just the one student or somebody who's just having a bad day, but sometimes it's even the teacher. And I feel like the way we deal with that is by discipline, then conversation, or because I feel like the student teacher relationship, sometimes teachers don't want to build that. And the teachers who do that, I feel that I've never heard of behavioral problems or anything in that situation, in that realm, where it's like, oh, this student was acting bad, so I need to get a safety officer, or I need to get the principal, or I need to get Dr. or Mr. Metcalf, or send them out of the room. They would take them, talk to them, ask them how they were, asking them like, are you okay? Are you having a bad day? What's the underlying meaning of this behavior than just discipline? And I feel like we need to get better at making that bond between student and teacher than just student versus teacher.
River?
Yeah, everything Yasir said, like, I think we're used to a dynamic in which we call out rather than calling in. And calling out is mostly like humiliating students. Like if they're running down the hallway, like, hey, get back here, don't make me write you up. That's mostly like Black students and brown students. Like they're teenagers and they're not like, I feel like that's often forgotten, but if we call them into like it's like, okay, what's going on, how like, and like taking the time to establish a relationship with a student is very valuable and creates sorry it creates valuable relationships between teachers and students that won't be so reliant on security and suspension and expulsion and detention.
Yes, I 100% agree. Liza said, I think we see an example of discipline being prioritized over education is when kids came in late in the mornings, they weren't allowed to go to their first period and had to stay in the cafeteria until homeroom. Students are already missing class, and making them miss a whole period completely isn't prioritizing their education. I hope once we get back to school, that policy doesn't rule anymore. And like everyone else said, I totally agree. I know last year there were a couple times, especially at the end of the year when I came into class, maybe I came at school maybe late, and instead of being able to go to like my calc class, I had to sit in a cafeteria with a bunch of other students. And I also don't see how that helps kids learn instead of just punishing them for coming in late. If anyone else has anything to say.
I also don't think that punishment is particularly like useful in any way. It's like, or gonna enact any type of change. Like if a student is late and it's of no fault of their own, who are you really punishing? Their grades? Because if you're taking a cumulative class, you're just going to continue to do worse and worse. We're not prioritizing these students' grades. We're trying to punish them for their lateness, which isn't really helping, because did it impact lateness? Like,
Karsten?
All right, so first off, like I really agree with what Liza said about like the missing classes. Wait, hold on. I just want to make sure I'm saying the right person. All right, yes, sorry. So yeah, and also like from like a psychology standpoint, a lot of people, especially younger people. Oh, I'm so sorry. I have a friend who's like spells their name that way and pronounces it Liza, so have it. But all right, thank you for correcting me though. But yeah, so from like a psychology standpoint, a lot of people, especially like neurodivergent people or like children or younger people, like naturally mirror their like the other person's behavior. So say an adult is yelling at you or just being angry, we often will naturally raise our defenses and act the same way. So often I feel aggression just brings more aggression, and punishment just does not help. So like just by calmly asking, I feel like that's way more beneficial and stuff.
Yeah, and I just want to say two things with that particular punishment that we had or might even still have with coming too late to school. Yeah, and we also, I just feel like we don't know why they relate. They might have been dropping off siblings to somewhere or something else. Maybe they missed their, like, it can even be like they just missed their bus. And so they had to, their mom had to like drive from work to come pick them up to take them to school. Like, we don't know. And sometimes being late is inevitable. Like the things happening in your life just might prevent you from being on school on time. And I feel like to be punished for that, and it's kind of not okay. And then the second thing I want to say is Dr. Lahari has even talked about this, where he's if a student is upset or is the kind of like the relationship between him and students, he tries to really build that strong bond. So like if a student is upset and they're in his office like yelling and screaming, and maybe they've been sent down by a teacher who was like, get out of my class, or they're just in the hallway and he brings them into the office, he lets them blow off the steam before he has the conversation with them. And I feel like that really shows that the relationship between student and administrator, student and teacher is very important, because once that anger or that whatever emotion is gone and you have the conversation, he knows more about the student. He knows what the trigger is. He knows all these things. And then you can start getting into solutions, and solutions that aren't punishments, but solutions that are actually helpful and that the student can use and carry on for the rest of their lives, even maybe to help with those scenarios. I feel like that's the key to progressing as a school and as teachers and as students and as, you know, kids becoming adults, than this battle we constantly are having between teachers, administration, and students.
Yeah, I completely agree. Ajari, I hope I'm saying your name right, also talked about how some students take attention away from teaching because a student is causing a problem. Instead of focusing on their lesson, focus all the attention on that student. And I can attest to that being true, especially I feel like when we were younger, a lot of my school existence was trying to not to like cause a problem or make a scene, and like figuring out who your friends are because you don't want to see as like that problem or that kid or hanging out with those kids. And a lot of those kids were children of color, and that kind of carries up through high school. So.
Not to take away from this discussion, but I feel like another issue is just the general power dynamics between teachers and students when some teachers begin to abuse that power, especially during the late room situation. I noticed there was a lot of like abusive behavior to students during that whole, I don't know, cafeteria. A lot of teachers were yelling at students, and it just seemed very inappropriate in general. And just like rather than yelling, creating that bond that Yasir talked about earlier between teachers and students can be a lot more meaningful.
I see that Cash and Zoe also had more comments on those discussions in the chat. Does anyone have any last minute comments on that before we move on to the next panel? Hearing none. Thank you all for having that discussion with us. I think we're going to move on to our second panel. Yay. So, Women's Student Union is a group from our second panel. It was founded in 2015 by Alexis Grady, Aaron Edelstein, and Lilo Blank. The purpose of WSU is to discuss issues related to intersectional feminism, and it fosters a community where diverse women are comfortable to express themselves, their opinions, and their viewpoints. WSU doesn't just focus on feminism as it pertains to white women, but as it pertains to all people. GSA was founded sometime in 2015 also, and it aims to curate a supportive community for Cheltenham High School's LGBT community. It also allows a safe space for students to be out and open and relieve the burdens that LGBT students face at Cheltenham High School that often sometimes are overlooked. They have done unofficial meetups at Outfest in October. They couldn't this year, obviously, because of COVID-19. And their meetings consist of discussions about current events, histories, and just like providing a safe space for students to vent and take a load off and give advice. Cool. And we also have WISE, which was founded by me in 2018. And WISE basically creates a community where anyone can come learn science without the fear of being like inadequate or the burden of feeling like they don't belong, as many non-male students in science and STEM classes often feel. Meetings are mostly just performing experiments and then recognizing underappreciated women. The purpose is to create a positive and uplifting community for women in STEM, and they have received grants, had SWE members come talk to students, and even present to younger children like at the Glenside Science Fair. So yeah. Cool. So our first question for this panel is CHS has a lack of gender neutral bathrooms in its facilities, and often admin frequently locks them because of misconduct that occurs by other students. How does the lack of gender neutral bathrooms at our school affect the LGBT plus community, and how do you wish to see this issue addressed? Arthur?
So as a trans student, this is something that like has affected me directly since basically my time in Cedarbrook when I came out. So and for those who don't know, the gender neutral bathrooms in Cheltenham are the women and men's faculty bathrooms in the new wing, which are both single stalls, and the nurse's office bathroom. So those are the only bathrooms for you know, people like non-cis people to be using, you know, if they don't feel comfortable using the regular bathrooms. So basically these bathrooms often end up being used like from non-trans students to either smoke weed or like take a longer time in the bathroom, if you know what I mean. And so that often leaves them occupied. Like sometimes it would be even like all three at once would be occupied and there'd be nowhere to use the bathroom. So over the years I've kind of tried to think of a lot of ways for this to be addressed, and it has come up in GSA discussions many times. So far we haven't really been able to come up with many solutions, but one thing I was thinking about was possibly finding a way to designate more bathrooms as gender neutral, not necessarily the multi-stall ones, because I obviously understand why that would not work for a public school to have multi-stall gender neutral bathrooms, but perhaps more of the faculty bathrooms, and perhaps discussing a way to designate. Well, it became a complicated issue because on one hand we wanted to have it so that people wouldn't use the bathrooms incorrectly by having a way to designate who can use them, but on the other hand that usually excludes closeted people who, you know, don't outwardly pass as not being cis from using them. So it's really been an issue that we've done a lot of discussions on and haven't been able to come up with a solution so far.
Carson?
Yeah, so I mean, also especially I can't really speak as much to the high school because I'm a freshman and obviously I really haven't been to the building much. But like as a non-binary person, I definitely feel I don't know how to like I definitely don't feel comfortable in either bathroom, both because neither of them reflect my gender identity, and also I've had very negative experiences in those bathrooms because of how I look. And so sometimes going into those multi-stall gender bathrooms not only causes dysphoria for me, but it can also bring back triggering memories. And just, I don't know, the kind of misconduct that goes on there is pretty difficult to like stop, in my opinion, because like, you know, we're obviously not going to install like cameras in the bathroom. That's disgusting. But I mean, I definitely agree with what Arthur said, like kind of designating more. Like with Cedarbrook, we didn't have as much of a problem with like them locking them, but we had a lot of problem with like they just didn't really take care of the bathrooms. Like one of them had a broken lock for the entire time I was there. So you had to like tie the door so that nobody would go in or just kind of cross your fingers. Like the other one didn't have any soap for about 6 months. And like, so also just maintaining them as if they were normal bathrooms. Because I mean, obviously maintenance in school bathrooms is, but I noticed it especially the gender neutral ones.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's kind of ridiculous that you guys only have like 3 bathrooms in all of the Cheltenham High School building to use. And I definitely think there are some solutions that can be made to accommodate students who don't feel comfortable going into gendered bathrooms. And I believe it's a discussion that 100% is not had enough. And something like using the bathroom should be accessible to everyone, so.
I was gonna say one thing too. I personally don't, am not in this conversation as much, but also I know in our school is like a big thing of, you know, being on time in class and things, and they're all in one side of the school. So if you have class on another side of the school, that time to use that bathroom and then to travel all the way across the school, and you're sometimes late to class or things, and there are a lot of penalties for that too. And I feel like that's also should change too. You should have more bathrooms located everywhere around the school so you don't have to deal with also those consequences now for using the bathroom that you feel comfortable in.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I was going to mention something about that. From like my past 3 years in high school, I would basically only be able to use bathroom if my class is in the new wing or right before lunch, since the nurse's office is near the cafeteria. Otherwise, unless it's an absolute emergency, I just don't really have the option to ask to go to the bathroom in class or to go between classes, because it just really wasn't feasible. It's like the amount of time it would take for me to walk there is basically the amount of time teachers expect you to go to the bathroom, use it, and come back. So it really became an issue of, unless it was an absolute emergency, like it was really hard to be able to get to the bathroom in like, and especially when I had substitute teachers, if I had to ask, and I'd be like, you know, I have to go to the gender neutral bathroom, so I might even take an upwards of like 5 minutes just to walk there and back. And sometimes they just don't understand, and you know, would get upset because they think I'm skipping class, but it really is just walking that far.
Yeah, I mean, like several times at Cedarbrook, I'd like nearly gotten sent to the principals and stuff because I was like not where I was supposed to be, but just trying to go to the bathroom like any other person. And like I mentioned this in the chat, like it got to the point where I literally had to like go to the counselor and be like, hey, can you just like write this little note saying like I use the gender neutral bathroom for blah blah blah, and don't like yell at me because blah 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 blah. Which like I really shouldn't have to do, just like, because also I was privileged because I was fully out and had supportive parents, but for people who aren't out, or maybe their parents aren't as supportive, that's really not as much of an option. So
And in addition, there's also the problem of, I forgot to mention this earlier because I haven't had gym since sophomore year, but we also don't have gender neutral locker rooms, and sometimes that poses even more of a problem because you're removing your clothes, and especially for trans people who look less like their sex at birth, it is really hard to. I was lucky that I've always had friends in my gym classes, so I could at least like hang out with them. I was comfortable around them. But for people who don't really know many people in their gym classes and don't look like their sex at birth, especially particularly for people assigned female at birth, it's really difficult to figure out what locker room to go to. And I remember in Cedarbrook, I used to bless my teachers. They were so supportive, but I had a pass to leave my class before gym a couple minutes early to run to the gender neutral bathroom and change there. But it's even more difficult. There's no like space nearby that can be turned into a gender neutral locker room, like that. That space in the building just doesn't really exist. So that's also been something that we've talked about in GSA that we really weren't sure how to solve.
Carson?
Yeah, and then also adding on to that locker room piece, like in Cedarbrook, I would literally do everything in my ability just to like not have to use the locker rooms. So like I said with my teacher, like I'd leave my stuff in his class. I'd like wear my gym clothes to school so I wouldn't have to get changed. And like, because I had a slightly awkward relationship with my gym teacher, like, I don't know. And also just, I was already being like kind of mistreated in there because I came out as bisexual a year before I came out as non-binary. So people were already like, oh, they're staring at me. They totally have a crush on me. And it just, so like already before I came out, I was trying to avoid using that because I just was being treated awfully in there. And especially since, again, you can't really monitor there because like the teachers aren't, watching people get changed. A lot harder to like do anything about it. And even when you do tell the teacher, it's like, well, I bet they didn't really mean it. I bet they didn't mean it in a mean way. And it's just, ugh.
Does anyone else have anything to say on that question? You can just unmute.
Yeah, the locker room situation is really upsetting, and I didn't really figure out that I was non-binary until we got into quarantine, so I haven't had to really deal with that. But as someone who was on like the boys volleyball team and did feel uncomfortable in the locker room, and now I know why, it is kind of upsetting that, well, one, like I can't just not, there is no non-binary volleyball team, but the locker room situation also just makes things more complicated. And the same thing as the bathrooms too.
Cool.
Does anybody have any other comments before we move on to the next question? Okay. If not, we're just gonna move on. People can just like go back if need be. Okay, in 2017 to 18, a new dress code policy was put into place at CHS thanks to WSU, but despite this change, the dress code is still often inconsistently enforced depending on many factors such as age, race, and gender. How does the implementation of CHS dress code policy feed into hypersexualization of girls, especially BIPOC girls, and what changes need to be made to combat this?
River?
Personally, I think education is key. I think this nation has a lot, well, it does. I know that it does have a deep history of tropes of Black women and also just like stereotyping that over sexualizes and criminalizes Black girls' bodies. And this also can like affects different communities. And with that said, I think education is key. Like there are plenty of documentaries and books and resources out there for staff to use to not discriminate. Well, not like to enforce this new dress code equally upon not only girls but people who also aren't like comfortable in their bodies or like who don't identify like as cis like female, and just not looking at them for their bodies and just enforcing the dress code as it should be, which is equally, and not paying over like so much attention to what people wear and really fostering an environment of education over discipline.
Yeah. So like I again can't really speak much as actually like in the high school, but I remember in like elementary school when I was dealing with a lot of sexual harassment from like older students. Basically the advice I received was, well, you should cover up, because I would wear like skirts just above the knee to school, and like sometimes I'd wear like tank tops, and that was kind of their advice until it got like really bad, which was ugh. But then also just like after that I just stopped wearing, even though that wasn't revealing at all, I stopped wearing revealing clothing. But like I saw a lot of my friends who like still did, and like I remember my friend, it was just a normal shirt, but when she raised her hand it like showed her belly button, and she got a dress code strike for that. And I've never seen this happen with like people's like AMAP people or boys. So yeah, I've just never really seen that happen with people who present as male or are male, and it's just, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah, I feel like we just need more like training on this, and just generally as a society, how we view women, and especially women of color.
Natalie?
Okay, I have been walking around the high school for a couple of years now. I think that it's the dress code. While I don't agree with having a dress code at all, I think that it's even having it right now would be okay if it was equally distributed among everyone. Because I especially see a lot of my friends get dress coded for like Carson said, like raising your hand above your head and having your belly button showing. A lot of girls get dress coded for that, and it happens to a lot of guys too. And that never gets dress coded. And I think that why I always question, and I see it all the time, and there's a lot of guys who walk around with their pants not on their waist. So I think it's a real problem, and I just am not entirely sure how to address it, but I just think that as long as everyone is aware of the problem, it should get addressed.
Yeah, I agree. The concept of not having a dress code is an interesting one that should be talked about more, Natalie. Arthur?
So this is kind of a mixture of like different things I've heard from friends, but not only is the dress code kind of unevenly what's the word, enforced, yeah, based on race, it's also sometimes differently forced based on like perceived sexualization. Like people with more like perceived sexual traits like bigger chest sizes also tend to get dress coded more often. And it's kind of something that, you know, students had happen to them even regarded as being akin to sexual harassment, because they know that it's because either the teacher or like the staff member or the students around them were like, you know, looking in that direction, and that, you know, if it were somebody who had like different physical traits, that, you know, it wouldn't happen.
I feel that also that the dress code is should not, but it is for the opposite gender also. So like for my at track a lot, the girls would run with sports bras on, but my coach would tell them to cover up because of a distraction to the boys. And that is completely like disrespectful, unnecessary, because they shouldn't have to change the way that they're dressing to please a boy or to more not please, to like, so you don't distract them. Like it should be as the boys should know how to act and how to stay focused on how to act, and not sexualize them for doing that the thing they're doing, which is pursuing a sport and trying to better themselves.
Let's go back to Elizabeth, I believe, and then Zoe.
So I think that the dress code reinforces not only gender inequality, but also racial injustice, because like some people have said, I know that, I mean, I've been dress coded a few times, but I'm sure that my friends of color have been dress coded way more than I have. And it's been a talking point a lot, saying like, oh, you're white and you don't get dress coded as much as we do. And that just reinforces everything that's been talked about before. And it's really unjust. And as well as gender inequality, like everyone has said, it's always girls that are getting dress coded. It's never a boy, and it's always because boys are distracted. But how many times has it been that a boy has actually been distracted? How many times has a boy raised a concern and had a problem with this? Never. So it's really just an unnecessary policy that shouldn't be a thing.
I think Zoe can go next, and then we'll move on to the next question.
I just want to say, like, the whole idea of it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, even if boys like are distracted, like that's just kind of how life is. Like, there's no dress code in real life that way. People are going to wear revealing things. So by having a dress code, it's kind of in a way like sheltering them, I guess. Kind of like it's just not realistic. It's not preparing them. If you think that this is actually a problem and it's impairing their ability to learn, then that, you know, that's not going to end in school. So I don't know how to word this, but hopefully you know what I'm saying. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, Naomi, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Just real quick, I just, show of hands, who has been distracted by a shoulder? Because I don't think that's a thing. So, you know, some of the dress code is just like, the things people get coded for don't even like make sense. Along the lines of like the reasoning, which I mean, I don't agree with at all. I don't think there should be a dress code, but like, if you're gonna follow the reasoning of like, oh, we like shouldn't have kids dressing inappropriately at school, like a lot of the body parts that are being like monitored, like just aren't even like sexual in any like conceivable way. I think it's very funny.
Yeah, also like, because again, what we've been saying is like, it's very rare that it's actually like male students that are being distracted or it's affecting their education. So it makes you kind of question, like, then who's getting distracted? Is it the male teachers? Because then that sure is not our problem if you're hiring teachers that are aroused by their students. That is, and it just goes to show, it's not the girl's problem to like make sure that they're covered up so like the people around them will be comfortable. Like, obviously we're not going to school in bikinis, but like, just, I don't know. always bothers me. It's always bothered me that like there's always this expectation for girls to cover up so that they don't get harassed, they don't get assaulted, so men feel comfortable. And it just feels so wrong. And I mean, it is wrong.
Awesome. Great. Thank you all for answering that question. I think we move to the next one, Makayla.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. All right. Sorry. Why do you feel is the main reason there aren't as many non-male students in upper level STEM and math classes, especially computer science and physics classes?
Natalie?
Okay, I think I 100% believe that this starts not even at the high school level, it starts at the elementary school level. I don't know if anyone can hear me right now. Venus, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're better this time.
Okay, I turned off my camera because I thought the last time I was okay. Anyway, I think it starts right at the kindergarten level. I think it's also a problem that a lot of younger students are placed into gifted classes, and that's like your only chance to be exposed to these type of upper level classes, and that creates the like educational like that gap that we see more at the high school. And I think that the reason because the reason that a lot of especially women and like minorities aren't seen in those upper level classes, and especially like the computer science classes, is because there aren't any computer science or even extracurricular science options for kids who aren't gifted. And I think that I had a good experience being gifted, but a lot of kids don't get that opportunity. And I think it should be more accessible to people, to like everyone, to be able to participate in things like science fair and the computer science honor society and the programming classes at the high school. And I think that those things should not only be available at the high school, but at the kindergarten level, because that's where it really starts. It starts in that like critical period when you're 4 and 5 and trying to learn what you're good at. And it's not, women especially are going to know what they're going to do by the time they're juniors. So if we can start as like a district with putting girls and little children into these computer science classes and these like more challenging science classes, I think we'll have more success later on in their careers.
Yeah, I completely agree, Natalie. It definitely starts at the younger level. The younger you can see yourself doing math and science and STEM, and the more comfortable you get with it early on, the more likely you are to pursue that when you get to high school. Carson?
Yeah, so I agree with like the gifted program. I mean, I could go on and on about the gifted program, but that's not like what the question is about. I have this one vivid memory of like we did some sort of coding thing in elementary school, and I was in the gifted program, but I was always kind of just like I was on a very thin wire. Like it was very clear that the teacher was like, all right, just I know these little people are okay with you, and if you get kicked out, you're not gonna have any friends. So I guess we'll keep you in. That was kind of the attitude she had with me. And it was mostly, I think it was about 7 people. I think 3 of which were like girls, and then me, who at the time I did identify as a girl, and then the rest were white boys. And it was like they were like tasked with, leading all the STEM stuff, all the coding stuff, and we were just kind of like, all right, you can do the reading. Yeah, do you want to paint a pretty picture? Oh, okay, here's some markers, and you can write a picture, you can draw a picture based on the book, or you can write something on the book. Okay, and then like when we would be like, hey, we want to learn coding, she'd be like, all right, we'll see if we can get to that, but we might not be able to, when she would like set aside time for like the boys to code or like let them come during lunch to do coding things. And like, again, it just goes to the like high school level. If you're taught from like such a young age, like, all right, they don't want me to do coding. Maybe I can't do coding. Maybe they know something I don't. It's just like instilling that insecurity in you from such a young age. Probably by the time you're in high school, like you might not even want to like pursue it. And it's just like, again, a lot of this starts at a very young age. And yeah, I feel like I'm missing something, so I'm probably gonna add on later, but that's all I have for now.
Yes, I completely agree. River.
Yeah, not to reiterate in any way, but just to attest to the disparities in the gifted program as well as in the STEM field in our district. I was usually like the only Black person or like Black girl in the gifted program, like with a few, like, you know, here and there. But like, I think the gifted program and just the exposure to like more STEM opportunities and stuff really helped me like find out what I want to like pursue. And a lot of Black kids and like other students of color didn't have the opportunity because they either didn't know about how to get involved with the gifted program or how to accelerate themselves in any way. And that was a bit frustrating because yeah, I also don't really like the thing of like the category of gifted because I think it's so complex. But either way, it's like it's just a matter of categorizing that really harms students. And so having those opportunities accessible to everyone, and like, and also like making the effort to make sure that they see them is like very important. And yeah, and also representation, I think, well, just because of the way society is, there's a lot of like more cis white men in STEM fields, like being our teachers and like stuff. So like when I saw Miss Aiken, like I think she was like inviting me in like EP to like play with like the little Ozo bots or whatever they were, like that was really fun. And I think it really made me want to pursue more STEM stuff. And yeah, and I think a lot of kids would really benefit from that. And I think it'll be a positive addition to our learning environment.
Yeah, I completely agree. The gifted program is definitely a complex structure we have in our school that has its benefits and downfalls. Arthur?
So I had an experience that was like surprising, like similar and different to what Carson experienced. Like them, I was presenting as a girl at the time, and back then it was me and two white boys, but it was really interesting. The gifted teacher at Glenside was a Black woman, and I think she actually kind of took it to the opposite extreme with me because I was the only person of color and the only female in the gifted program. It almost felt like she was actually pushing me harder, and that she was constantly putting more things like on my shoulders than she would with the rest of them, because it was like it almost felt like I was expected to be pulling the entire like woman of color excellence for the entire elementary school at the time. And it actually pushed me kind of away from trying as hard because I felt like it was my burden for the whole school. And like there were so many times when I wished, like, rather than putting all those expectations on me and keeping all of these things that I wasn't really interested to like try and force me to do, that they had just like brought in more other people, because I knew for a fact that there were other people, like other girls and other people of color in the school who were as smart as me, but for whatever reason they just like weren't put in, and I was just the representation. And it was so strange, and it was just this really huge pressure to be like the diversity of the school's gifted program. It was strange.
Yeah, and I feel like even like I've never had a teacher put that pressure on me, but being maybe like one of few Black females in upper STEM classes, a lot of times it feels like if you're failing, then you're like representing like everyone who looks like you because no one else is in that room. So that's a very good point. Yasir?
I want to, like talk about like the like, Black people in general being misrepresented in STEM. And, me as I've really recently, since like in high school, really excelled in STEM with, AP physics and AP calculus and things. But I didn't, before when I was younger, I didn't think I was good at these things. I thought I was only good at sports. I remember from middle school walking from home from school and coaches stopping their cars to come out and give me flyers about their basketball and their football teams and how they wanted me to play on them. And getting into high school, and all the coaches were always like, can you play for my team? Will you play for this? You'll be a D1 athlete and everything. And so I always just thought to myself, oh, I'm going to be an athlete. Oh, I'm going to like go to the NFL or the NBA or something like that. But I actually learned that I'm really good at STEM and I'm really good at math and science. And it's really something I'm passionate about. But if it wasn't for my parents who really pushed me academically and helped me academically, and when I came into this district, I came from a Philly school and I was put into remedial classes because they thought I was not up to my grade level. And so on and on for years and years, I didn't know I was being tracked in that way until I was getting into middle school and I was picking classes for high school. And I was noticing my parents noticed I was never going to be in Algebra 2 or pre-calc or a calculus class, or I was never going to take these classes. So they had to fight for me to be able to take these courses. And it just shows that I was tracked from a really young age to not be a part of STEM and not to be into these higher classes. And if it wasn't for my parents noticing this and really fighting for me, I would not be where I am today, going to college to be a bio major. And I just feel like we have to change that and get our all Black kids, male and female, into these roles and into STEM to better this.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember we did some like coding and stuff in like our STEM classes. I forget, they had a different name in like 5th grade, 6th grade, but like they're called. And then also in like our digital media classes in Cedar Brook. But first off, like we didn't really have a choice to go into those. Like they just kind of threw us in. So if you didn't get in, like if you didn't get put into those classes, well, too bad. You don't get exposure to this. And then also, I noticed like I'm not naturally good at like coding and STEM stuff. And like I enjoyed it, I just wasn't as naturally good at NECTA. I mean, yeah, I can't English. I just wasn't as good, like naturally good at it as some other kids were, because again, I could have had that exposure in elementary school, but I did not. And I noticed that the teachers seemed almost annoyed to help me, where it's just like, of course the girl can't code. Like, what did we expect? And then like when like I had some like female friends, also like friends of color, who were very good at it, and kind of what Arthur was saying, just like they're kind of raised on a pedestal, and like, okay, if you fail, you're like taking down the entire community at the school. You're like failing your race or your gender, and like that's just a terrible pressure to be putting on literal children. And because like while it might not seem too harmful, that can like grow and just stay with them as they become adults, and just like really harmful. And then also like I forgot what I was gonna say again. But like all right, yeah, I'm not gonna take up any more time, so I forgot what I was gonna say, sorry.
Thank you, Carson, and thank you everyone for that discussion. I think we'll be moving on to our final panel of the night. So the first club on this panel is United Asians Speak, which was founded in 2018 by Kevin Toole and Tarina They discuss political and social and civic issues regarding Asians, and they address topics such as cultural appropriation, Asian representation, racism, and more. Currently, they're creating posts about growing awareness about the recent Asian hate crimes and Asian history within America. The purpose of their group is to discuss issues and concealed matters and misrepresented cultural interests in the Asian community. They have had boba fundraisers where they donated their proceeds to an organization called the Invisible Girl Project. They have been noticed by Nydia Han, who is an Emmy-winning journalist and creator of an award-winning docu-series on Instagram multiple times due to their incredible social media. And they have even met with Napoleon Nelson to discuss Asian activisms and ways to support Asians within our own community. We'll also be hearing from Jewish Student Union, which was founded by Atara Saunders and Miriam Decker. It discusses Jewish life in Cheltenham and how to further educate the community, and aims to form a tight-knit community for Jewish students at Cheltenham and discuss events and create a sense of camaraderie between those students. They spend a majority of their time discussing injustices in the Jewish community and outside of the Jewish community and combating anti-Semitism.
Okay, the next club is the Sunrise Club. It was founded by River Somerville, Charlie, and Rico. Their goal is to empower young people through political education, action, support, and endorsement, and to delve into issues that may not be discussed in the school setting and enable high schoolers to unlock their potential and standing up for what they believe in. It's a youth movement to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. And they have held a successful Black Lives Matter protest, a local poster pasting wait, is this the Black Student Union one?
I think it was like pasted on both sides, but yeah, this is accurate.
Oh, okay. An Instagram with over 180 followers, a local recruitment phone bank, watch parties, working at voting polls, and more. They discussed relevant social political issues, specifically regarding climate change, racial injustice, and their interconnected issues. Another club that we're going to be talking about today is Students Demand Action. It was founded by Naomi in 2020. They aim to advocate for better and more comprehensive legislation regarding gun ownership and gun violence in America. During their meetings, they learn and discuss about gun violence issues in America and how to take action. They also regularly use social media to advocate for gun sense legislation during COVID-19.
Awesome. Okay. So the first question we have for you guys is, at CHS, there are not many Asian teachers despite our sizable Asian population. But that being said, many teachers of all race rarely interfere or acknowledge Asian discrimination in the hallways or in the classroom. How impacted would it be to see more Asian representation in faculty at Cheltenham High School? Lisa?
Thank you, Venus. I think it would be impactful to have more Asian representation in faculty at CHS because Asian students will have someone to relate to and come to about personal matters that they might not be able to discuss at home. And like seeing someone that shares a cultural background to you will most likely allow our Asian students to feel more comfortable.
Yeah, I agree. Personally, I didn't even realize the lack of Asian students at our high school until I saw that question being asked. But compared to like the amount of Asian students we have, the faculty definitely does not match, and it does not seem like an issue that is widely discussed about at our school. Does anyone else have anything to add? River.
it's not really my my like, I don't have the authority and okay, this is sounding really bad. Like, I don't know if I don't want to speak too much in depth about, because obviously I haven't, I'm not Asian, but I do want to speak as like an ally. And I think from like recent things I've been learning and, you know, seeing that a lot of I felt like Asian American students have to like deal with being perceived like, you know, as a model minority. And I think just more Asian representation shows like more complexity, because I think like within the Asian American community, because, you know, there's, how do I phrase this? I feel like seeing more people who like don't look like you or allows you to be more open-minded, I guess. Just because like if you only see like one Black person as your teacher, like what if you start like, you know, start generalizing and stuff. Like I think having more representation and more like contribution in general from Asian teachers and students is definitely a goal that needs to be implemented into our school. Sorry I didn't phrase that really well, but I hope you understood what I was trying to say.
No, I definitely did. And I think it's also hard to, like, I know personally, if it's hard for me to go to certain teachers about, say, concerns I have about our school, especially as they pertain to race, if I don't feel connection on them on a race level. And so I can't speak for Asian people, but I would assume it's also hard to talk about issues that pertain to race with students or with faculty who don't, like, who've never had that experience and don't necessarily know how to address it. Zoe?
I just want to say that like throughout Cheltenham, I feel like I've learned a decent amount about sexism and racism against Black people and that kind of stuff, but I haven't really learned much about racism against Asian people. And I've learned most of what I know about that over this past year. And I wish they taught more about that, because that's really just, I feel like I should have known all of this already.
River?
Yeah, and just to add on something, a disparity I noticed was like, my mom, I was telling my mom about this and she was like, pick your battles, River. But I'm like there's like AP European history, but then there's like a minor that's like African American history or whatever. And I think that's like a problem because it shows what we see as valuable in our curriculum, like more valuable in terms of like credits and like depth of like the material that we're learning. And there's definitely not, well, not that I've been brought to my awareness, like an Asian American class, like history class, or just like there's a lack of ethnic studies in general. So I think, and like we group stuff into like world history, and then there's like AP world history, and then there's like AP European history. So I'm like, how are we going to, like, yes, we want to get more minorities into AP classes, but like what about the classes themselves, and what are we actually teaching that's valued, and who are the teachers teaching it? Like, is there representation, and what are students getting from those classes, and the people that they see every day, and what are they being like indoctrinated in any way, or actually being aided in seeing people in their complexity and stuff like that. Yeah.
Arthur?
Yeah, I also thank you for bringing up the point about classes. I remember during language pick, like when we would pick what language we learned, I was like really upset that there wasn't any ancient Asian language to speak of. Like I'm Filipino. I didn't expect any Filipino language to be on there because they're not spoken as often, but I kind of like wished that at the very least Mandarin was. And I remember this was like a really vivid memory is at I believe the middle or end of last year in a push class we had the AP European history teacher come in to kind of advertise the class to us. And I remember he said like something along the lines of like AP European history is such a good class to take because like Europe is and I'm paraphrasing, he said, because Europe is like where most of the world's advancements were, and it's like the most interesting continent to study. And I remember I made like POC eye contact with like half of the other POC people in the class, and there was this kind of collective sigh of frustration of like, why did this man just walk into this class and say that to us? And who did he think that was going to convince to take his class? Like, I was just so shocked. I was like, why did he think that that was something he could say? But I just, that was a really vivid memory that I have.
Yeah, and it just goes to show like how those classes do like instill this sense in students that certain history is more like has more advancements or is more impactful than another group's history, because that is all we're fed. Joelle?
On that, I remember in 10th grade, I took AP World, and that should encompass the entire world. And just to comment on the fact that we were on Europe for, I want to say, like, it felt like forever. We were learning Europe every single day, and the teacher was super enthusiastic. We got to like Africa. We had to self-teach that unit, and it was he just was at his desk and he wasn't really engaging. We had to self-teach the entire unit, and it just was like a real strange contrast. So yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Lisa?
Yeah, I wanted to go off of what Arthur mentioned about having no Asian languages offered, especially Mandarin, because it's one of the most spoken languages in the world. So it's kind of sad to see, like, no shame on Latin because I take Latin, like Latin's a dead language, but Mandarin is like one of the most spoken language, and to have like not even that language offered at CHS is kind of discouraging. And especially in US history classes, there are like Asian American US history, and even if we might go over that topic, it might be for a day, and it's usually minimized and taught too generally, and we don't get to dive into the intricacy of Asian American history, especially with our history of being excluded through like the Chinese Exclusion Act, the Chinese massacre, Japanese internment camps during World War II, etc. And yeah, it's kind of discouraging.
Yeah, Yasir?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the Mandarin topic real quick, or like the language topic. And yeah, I remember in our group with like the ambassadors, Dr. Mars, we brought up that thing, we brought that up too, was like we were talking about how Black history isn't studied enough, like, like post-Black history and all these things. And we were talking about languages and how we offer only like a certain, like only a couple. And we were talking about like maybe offering Mandarin or something. And Dr. Marseille, the superintendent, he was saying that he brought this up before and he got a ton of pushback from parents, and he was saying mostly white parents. And I thought that was really interesting. And I didn't quite understand how strong, that was like my first real time fully understanding, even within our community, the negative connotations towards like Asians and Asian Americans. And I thought it was like so interesting, and I was very upset and confused actually that just introducing a new language that's so widely spoken across the entire world has such a negative connotation to it in our community, and I was appalled by it.
Yeah, like I mentioned in the chat, like I brought this up to one of my teachers once, and they were like, oh, well, it's because they have a different alphabet. Like, that's part of your job, to teach a language. So yeah, teach the alphabet. Like, maybe that will take another unit, but I mean, that doesn't take, like, just still teach it. And I remember I was talking to like one of my family members about like, yeah, I'm thinking about taking like Japanese classes, which again, not like Mandarin, but another Asian language. And she was like, well, I don't know. I don't feel right about that. Like, what about COVID? People might think, like, because this was during like the pandemic, and this was like my grandmother, she's elderly, but that does not excuse this. Just, yeah, like, because like, yeah, I'm thinking about starting Japanese lessons, and she was like, well, people are gonna think you have COVID if you know Japanese. And like, first off, like, there's no connection. And like, there's no connection between like the coronavirus and Chinese people. And like, Japan is a completely different place with a completely different culture. And just like, also just kind of that, like, I don't know the word for it, but just like, I'm blanking on the word, but just treating a lot of Asian cultures as just one culture, like just combining Japan, Korea, and China, also just treating those as the only 3 Asian cultures. Just like, all right, so we've got Japan, China, Korea, nowhere else exists. Nope. So also like that is just also, yeah, I'm blanking on the word for that, but just treating every single just treating all Asians as a like one group. And while yes, Asian is a race, there's also so many different cultures in there. So
River, I know you have the next stack, but it's getting close to 8, and I know there are 2 other questions we want to get to hear from Sunrise and JSU. So is it okay if we skip it? Sorry. That being said, it looks like we're going to go a little bit over 8 o'clock, if that's okay with anyone. Okay. I think we should move on to our next question, Makayla.
Yeah, let's move on. Okay. Do you want me to? Oh, it's me, sorry. As the majority of the Jewish population in CSD is white passing, many have there's a complex role in society as they are both part of upholding systems of oppression while also being targeted and discriminated against because of their religion and culture. How hard is it to navigate that complexity, and how can CHS aid in having a more open dialogue about that conflict?
Eden?
So this is like obviously a really interesting conversation and a really complex one. And I think first off, a lot of people don't realize that Jews aren't all white. And there are a lot of Jews of color. And the problem with being like a white or white passing Jew, not problem, but the complexity of it is that you have white privilege, but also you are the target for hate crimes. Like you are the big target for white supremacy. And I just totally blanked on what I was gonna say next. So I think the main thing CHS can do is probably just educate, because education does so much. And anti-Semitism really all just starts from people being uneducated and forming theories and conspiracy theories, because conspiracy theories always somehow end up with Jewish people being the target, or the root of the conspiracy. And I think I don't want to, but I think I'm speaking with everyone, not everyone, but a lot of Jews at CHS and Jews in the world saying, when I say that I have had people say stuff to me that's just blatantly anti-Semitic when they didn't mean to be blatantly anti-Semitic, because they are just uneducated. And being uneducated on this topic also results in Jews of color feeling delegitimized, not legitimate. Like when speaking to Jews of color, they have told me that they've been asked like, oh, how are you Jewish? Like that's the first thing people ask them when they find out that they're Jewish. And so I think what CHS can do is just educate, which which needs to happen on a lot of things and should happen because it's a school. Okay.
Thanks, Eden. Naomi?
Yeah, so I'm not with JSU, but I'm a Jewish person. You know, bat mitzvah, all that. And I'm also white, which I think is pretty obvious, but just to clarify, if there was any confusion. So I think that's something that's important to think about when we're talking about Jewish people and our relationship with oppression is the difference between ethnicity and race, which can kind of be murky sometimes for different people. But like for me, like I'm white, and I, you know, when I'm filling out like my college applications, I'm putting down that I'm white because I, you know, surprise, like I am, and my family all came here from Europe. But ethnically, I would probably argue that I'm Jewish because we do tend to be self-selecting, and our communities are very small and like tight knit. And so I think it's important to like recognize us not as just a religion, but also as an ethnic group. And I think ethnic group and not race is important because I've heard some people try to say that Jewish people are their own race, and that is also not right because there are Jews in every corner of the world, you know, due to the diaspora, you know, because a lot of times we're not wanted anywhere, so we kind of go everywhere. And in terms of anti-Semitism that I've seen at the high school, because I have seen like a fair share of it, I think a lot of it can be resolved through like better education and being not only willing to have those conversations, but open to maybe like being a little bit wrong and like oh, like maybe I can learn something. Because I know that we live in a community that has a lot of Jewish people in it, like more than usual. I think we make up a very small percentage of the population in America, but like, you know, if you drive down Old Drake Road, you pass 3 synagogues in like, you know, 2 minutes. So I think it's important for us specifically at Cheltenham, because there is a large Jewish population, to be open about, you know, educating each other about like what that means to be Jewish, and also like how we can be targeted, even though a lot of us, you know, specifically at Cheltenham, are white. So it's like not, you know, racism, obviously, but it's a different kind of, still bad, like, you know, like oppression almost.
Yeah, I mean, it is oppression, not almost oppression, but yeah, I completely.
Yeah. I think like some of it is like it's awkward saying that you're oppressed when you're a white person, because you don't want to like take that conversation away from people of color, because it's obviously much worse. And, you know, like for someone of color, like you can be targeted on the street because like you look black, but like, you know, being targeted as a Jewish person is very different because there are obviously stereotypes, but there's not really like a way to be Jewish. So it can get like kind of murky. And I think once again, just like being like cognizant of like how complex it is and how nuanced anti-Semitism can be is very important.
Arthur?
Yeah, so this has kind of been something that I've had a lot of thoughts on. I've only ever been Asian passing, but I am half white, and that white side is like entirely Jewish. And it's kind of been something I've always been aware of, how like, you know, because I never passed as like stereotypically Jewish and I don't practice in any way, people, you know how like once the one person of that oppressed group leaves, people are a little more open to being oppressive. Like, cause I've had people like make like snide comments towards me about Jewish people because they don't realize like my connection to Jewish people. And I've also noticed that like what Eden and Naomi were saying, like a lot of the anti-Semitism in Cheltenham is kind of a result of miseducation. Like I've noticed a lot of it is like people within the same friend group, like kind of making comments about or towards like a Jewish person in the friend group that the person ends up kind of laughing off or like being like, oh, like stop. But it's never like, but it's very obviously something that they shouldn't have said and that the person is uncomfortable with. And then also experiencing like then at, you know, family dinners with my Jewish, like the white Jewish side of the family, that they're also, in addition to obviously having their own experience with anti-Semitism, also kind of getting mixed up between race and ethnicity, and saying not only that they're people of color when they're all like blonde and pale, but also like then making kind of similarly thought of as innocent but kind of targeted and offensive comments towards like the Asian side of the family that comes. So it's always been kind of something I thought of, like, that we really need to, you know, it's there's like a gap to be bridged, both like educating people about anti-Semitism and like, you know, educate Jewish people also educating themselves about like how, if they're white passing, how that like plays into their own experience as Jews.
Yeah, I completely agree, Arthur. Like, besides that 1 year in EP, like Jewish history isn't really talked about that much in the high school. And I can see how that stems a lot of misinformation. Zoe, I think that'd be our last stack for this question.
Yeah, like you mentioned, we had that 1 year of like basically just the Holocaust, but there's so much other culture that we just haven't learned about. And also the main thing that bothers me with Jewish education is we're taught about like Hanukkah being the Jewish version of Christmas, but we're not taught about like Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the actual important ones. And teachers, like when we get off, they're like, oh, it's just a Jewish holiday, and they don't explain it at all. And they just kind of brush it off. And that's a perfect opportunity to explain, what's going on. Because the kids ask, what is it? And they go, oh, it's just a holiday, I don't know. And that kind of thing. And we had the like holiday parties at EP, visually just Christmas parties and then a dreidel song. But like that didn't make much sense to me. And we don't really care about the dreidel song. I mean, most Jewish people, I think, most Jewish people that I've talked to, like it just feels like we're like an afterthought. But I would much rather have a little thing for the high holidays. That's the main thing. The dreidel song is, oh, I thought you were going to say it's really good. It is really good in a terrible way.
I hate it. And I hate that you have to come up with a new thing for the dreidel to be made out of every verse.
It's a good point.
And I also hate that whenever I say something like funny, it's all like that, you can't make a dreidel out of that, Naomi. Shut up. I can make dreidels out of whatever I want to.
Okay. Eden, last one.
Oh yeah, this is super quick, just going off of what Zoe said. So with Jewish holidays and stuff, for example, Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah in the beginning of the year, it's like I'm happy that my not Jewish friends get days off, and like teachers do like be like, okay, you get a day off, and I usually have teachers assign work, which I understand they have to like keep their curriculum going, especially if it's an AP class. However, if I'm fasting and being in synagogue all day, I don't have time to do work. Like Yom Kippur is literally the holiest day of the year in Judaism, and it's sort of just that really annoys me, and it's sort of ignorant, I guess is the word I would use. But yeah,
Yeah, thank you everyone for engaging that conversation. Our next question is, many people see environmental issues as purely scientific issues, when in reality, climate change and environmental concerns disproportionately affect marginalized communities. As Cheltenham starts to be a more sustainable school, what can they do to ensure that marginalized groups are not on the outskirts of conversations pertaining the environment and sustainability at Cheltenham? Carson?
Wait, hon, can you repeat the question? Like, I'm sorry, you froze on my screen, so I didn't hear it.
Oh yeah, sorry. Many people see environmental issues as like pure scientific issues, when actually like climate change and environmental concerns disproportionately affect marginalized communities. So as Cheltenham starts to move into a more sustainable school, what can they do to ensure that marginalized groups are not on the outskirts of conversations pertaining to the environment and sustainability.
I mean, one thing that I recently learned and found really interesting was like somebody made a map showing like trees and then like overlaying it with like where like a lot of like where there's like larger communities of people of color, and what you'll actually see is there's a lot less trees around there, which not only is like not great for the environment there, it actually will again goes into like what's the word, just like it makes it a lot easier for like police to monitor there, and just like because something that they said was like there were less trees just so like police could be there to watch and see what there's, again, that just bias. And so that was something I found really interesting, which, and apparently it also can like actually affect the temperature in just that neighborhood by up to 2 degrees, which is insane to me. And also a lot of sustainable things are incredibly expensive. And like, while yes, there are wealthy people, like Black families here and like people of color, there's a ginormous economical gap. And then often we're like those communities will be shamed for not using these like more sustainable resources when they genuinely can't afford them. And also going to a different minority of disabled people, some disabled people will genuinely need to use these like plastic straws in order to like drink, and like they'll be shamed for that, or even they're getting banned because people were using them too much. And like it's, yeah.
Yes, Elizabeth, and thank you, Miss Haywood.
So environmental racism is a big issue, and a way to, in general, combat, going back to the question, this is really just educating students. It's crucial to implement climate change into the curriculum. It's science and it's very important. But going into the racist institute, some activists call environmental racism the new Jim Crow laws, because more than half of the people who live in these hazardous zones that is caused by the burning of fossil fuels and all of these non-sustainable practices are people of color. They're disproportionately affected by what's going on right now. That's also affecting the earth, and it's affecting everyone. And like stated before, people of color tend to live in urban areas, which is where these problems are most prevalent. So it really just all ties back to that inequality in the system. And it's so important that we learn this stuff in school.
Charlie?
And yeah, also going back to, well, I think the best way for the environmental movement to bring marginalized communities to the table is simply to partner with them more often, because many of the issues are so interconnected, because part of white supremacy is the concept of supremacy over nature also. So like before the Sunrise Movement came along in, I think, around 2017, most environmental organizations were, I guess they still are, predominantly white, and like the environmental movement often ignored environmental racism. So like with the, like ever since like 2018 with the like a greater number of youth coming into the environmental movement and people of color, that gap is beginning to, or racial issues are being seen in the broader environmental movement a lot more often. So yeah, it's since communities of color are disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis and environmental degradation, it's of utmost importance that everyone is heard.
Yeah, I think it definitely is important to reach out to people and give them a seat at a table. Carson, I'm gonna skip your stack, sorry. I think we should move on to the next question if that's okay. Makayla?
Okay, so recently our armed shooter drill was modified to evacuate CHS in sections and then have all of us gather in the baseball field. So what aspects of this drill are flawed and how would you modify it to make students feel safer and not more scared?
I think I'll take this one first, if that's okay. Like students demand against, gun violence, whatever. So I think that the baseball field idea came from a place of like, oh, let's keep everyone together so that we know where they are. Which, like, I understand, like, yeah, when you're in charge of a school, you don't want to be like liable for some kid running away into the street. At the same time, if there's a school shooter, the best thing for student safety is to get out and disperse as fast as possible, wherever that is. So the thing that I don't like about the baseball field plan is that it endangers us. When you think about having us calmly walk to a field, like, first of all, that's not gonna happen. If someone's in the school with a gun, people are gonna be kind of freaked out and probably running. Also, if we're all like lined up there, and let's say that the shooter does know the plan, because a lot of times people that shoot up schools shoot up their own school, so they would like know. An AK-47 can shoot 600 rounds in a minute. So, you do the math of like, okay, if there's 600 kids that make the field, how long is it going to take until that's, like a mass grave situation? And I don't want to have to think about that, right? Like, I want to feel like if I'm at school and something happens, that my best interest is the same as the administrator's best interest, which doesn't, that feels like there's a discrepancy right now, because this idea of keeping us together or keeping us on school grounds seems like more of a liability stunt than anything. I know that a lot of times teachers in classes will like read us the plans at the beginning of the year and then put them down and say like, if there's a shooter, just run. And I wish that that kind of honesty was reflected at the higher level of administration, that care for our lives instead of the care for like, how do we deal with the kids? Because it's hard to deal with kids if they're, get shot, which is, I think, a very like tough thing to say, but like it's important to remember like that the most important thing in the situation is our lives, not like being kept track of neatly.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think another reason why students may feel like this new plan is more of like a liability stunt than like care for actual students is like, personally, I don't know if any students were consulted at all when this plan was being made. Like, how does this make you feel safe with this plan that we've implemented? And I think that,
and I think also I think it says a lot that teachers don't feel okay with it, and that they feel the need to tell us something different that directly contradicts it right afterwards. Because I think if you asked any of the administrators, like, what would you do? What would your advice be for your kid if a shooter came into their school? They wouldn't say, follow everyone else to one centralized location. They would say, get the hell out as fast as you can, because that's the safest thing to do, right? So why is that not reflected in the language used to tell us? Because I feel like at the high school level, especially, we're mature enough to understand the gravity of these situations. So I just also really wish that, we would be spoken to in a way that, reflected our maturity.
I totally agree. Does anyone else have anything to add on?
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, you can go first.
All right, thank you. So, I mean, I remember, like, the first time I remember having an active shooter drill was in, I think, first grade, which, first of all, it's awful that first graders, 6 and 7 year olds have to be worrying about, okay, will I make it out of school today? Like, is somebody going to shoot us? And I remember, just because they didn't tell us it was a drill either. They pretended as if it was real, which was also incredibly problematic. But just with also the new plan, you're right, like sending us to one centralized location, it feels more like trying to avoid lawsuits than actually caring about the students. And so basically that's been also the advice that my parents have given me, just like, all right, don't listen to the teachers if they tell you to go to one central location with all the other students. Run. Like they told me to just go knock on somebody's door, go door to door knocking, see if you can get shelter. In the wise words of John Mulaney, scatter. But yeah, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell, but yeah, just sorry, my cat knocked something over. But yeah, just because nobody's actually going to follow this plan if there's a school shooter. Same with fire drills or whatever other drills. We're not going to be orderly. We're in panic. This is a traumatizing situation. We're not going to be walking slowly in a straight line, going to one central location, standing there quietly. We're going to be running. We're going to be screaming. We're going to be panicking. We're children. That's what we do when we're scared. That's what adults do when they're scared. So, yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yasir?
Not to play devil's advocate, but also the school can't just put out things to parents and administration, be like, oh yeah, the plan is just run. There has to be some type of structure, some type of forum that says, this is our plan. I hope this never happens, but if it does, this is our plan to keep your students safe. This is our plan to evacuate the building efficiently and safely. I'm not saying that we have the best plan, but also I do know that they spent a lot of time making their plan that they have made. And these are all considerations that they've had in mind. And I'm saying, maybe with our help, maybe we should be a part of the conversation for the next plan that they make. But I think we can't just throw away we can't just say that their plan was terrible and they didn't put any thought into it. There was a lot more behind it than we think. That's all I gotta say.
Well, I know that they put thought into it. I just, once again, they should have talked to students, because I personally don't feel comfortable going to a place where everybody else is. Right? I don't think any of us do, because it's a bad idea. I also think that they know that it wouldn't pan out like that. That there would be 3 kids on the baseball field and 1 teacher. It feels like there's a disconnect, I think, between what admin thinks would happen or wants to happen and what's reality. Because personally, I would much rather survive than follow a rule. I also think it's just sort of blatantly dangerous for us to be all in one place, especially with the high firing rates of a lot of very popular and easily accessible machine guns, having a bunch of kids in one room and someone with bad intention, it can't go well.
Zoe?
I was going to say basically the same thing, but not as well worded. Yeah.
Yeah. I think from what I'm hearing, the number one thing is transparency from admin. Even if we have an organized drill that we do, maybe information up front that if this were a real situation, obviously these are the steps you should take, but as to be prepared, we do this drill this way. I don't know if that makes sense, but
yeah, totally. I think a big part of my issue with the sort of plan that's in place is that they're treating us like we're younger children, that we're sort of blindly obedient. But especially in the high school, we're at a level where we're thinking critically, and we're thinking critically about ourselves and our own safety, because we've seen the news and we know what can happen. So it's important, I think, for administration to remember that not all of the kids in the district are like, 8.
Okay, I think we're going to go on to our last question of the night, which is for anyone and everyone who wants to answer. So many times, students, such as the students here, feel as if they're working against admin and adults in their activism and advocacy at CHS. What behavior from admin makes students feel that they are against them and not for them? And how can admin and adults help students in their agenda rather than hinder students in their agenda? Arthur.
So this has been a very specific instance, but from multiple accounts from other trans students, like at least with the past principal, I don't know how, I haven't had this problem as much like more lately, but previously when trans students bring up that teachers are not respecting, like calling them by the right name or not calling them by the right pronouns, which obviously like we understand that people make mistakes, but we don't usually bring these things up until we're pretty certain that it's on purpose. But normally when these things happen, admin in the past has either brushed it off or sided with the accused teacher, and that has been a kind of major breach of trust for many trans students, where they feel like they can't actually go to admin with these problems, and they just kind of have to either deal with it and just have that negative impact on their mental health, or just oftentimes switch classes, which can cause all kinds of complications to the rest of their schedule and academics. So that has definitely been something that we've had like many complaints about over the years.
Awesome, thanks, Arthur. Zoe.
Well, I have a 504 and I've had a couple problems with that at school. For the PSAT, it was like a whole big complication of whether I would be able to be in another room. And then I spent like the first hour of that day trying to figure it out. I was moving all over the school, and all of the teachers were on different pages saying, oh, there is a room dedicated to this. And some teachers saying, there's no such thing as this room. I don't know where you heard about this. And it was very disconnected. And I ended up not being able to go in a different room. And I didn't get as good a score as I could have gotten. And it could have been a lot easier. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, also kind of going off of what Arthur said, something I experienced and a lot of other trans people have experienced is when we try to get our names changed in the system, we're told, all right, well, we can't change it until it's legally changed, which is not true. I mean, my name is not legally changed yet, but we managed to get in the system because like both me and my parents advocated for me. But that's also just something that kind of creates that disconnect. And with the pronouns, especially me, since I use they, them pronouns, I often get like when I tell higher ups like, all right, this teacher is not respecting my pronouns, well, they probably just don't understand. They're older, you should cut them some slack. Like, well, it's my education. If I'm feeling uncomfortable while I'm being taught, I'm not getting the best education I can be getting, which is what you want to be doing, isn't it? And like often I feel very infantilized. Is that the word? I don't know. But like just off, I'm like, oh, you want to use they, them pronouns? All right, pat, pat. That's very cute of you. And just not quite as respected as I feel like other cis students are or binary trans students are. And then also with like, this isn't specifically administration, but I feel like generally when I try to talk to adults about issues with just literally anything, I'm often written off as just being a naive child or not fully understanding. And it's like, no, I've experienced this. I've done hours and hours of research. My friends have experienced this. I know what I'm talking about. So it's not specifically the administration, it's just the past and that kind of disconnect between older generations and not feeling I'm being taken seriously because I'm young.
Yeah, I can also say a lot of times if you tell admin or like staff how you feel about a situation, like they might say, yeah, sure, yeah, like nothing will be done about it. So that personally, I feel like is a way that it seems like admin is not advocating for the things that students seem are important. Naomi?
Yeah, so in the context of making it hard for us to like do advocacy, you know, like all of our clubs are, I think I've run into a lot of roadblocks with forming my club. I know the person who was in charge of that at the time was a little grumpy and not super helpful. And then also that whole thing about having to have a stamp from the office in order to post a flyer. I understand that like you don't want to spread misinformation or, you know, club stuff that isn't like really a club or like that's not sanctioned with the school. But at the same time, it does make it hard for like, you know, getting stuff out on a, you know, on a quick timetable. I know like when I started Students Demand, we were in person, you know, before everything got shut down, like we were having meetings every 2 weeks. And if it took a whole week for our posters to get out, then our posters might only be up for like a day or so. And I feel like it really like limited the scope of like our reach and, you know, just some of like the bureaucracy, I think dealing with the mechanics of running a club could be a little bit smoother at the high school. And I think that would make it not only easier for us to function like behind the scenes, but also for people like join in, because I know that there is a lot of interest regarding all of our groups at the high school. I feel like sometimes because of how hard it is to like advertise ourselves that it's not, you know, we don't really get that like full reach, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, as someone who's also started a club, I think like part of the problem is there are so many things you need to know that no one tells you. So if there was like a
Yeah.
central location that like tells you like each of the steps needed to run a club or like who you need to contact, that would be really helpful to students who want to contribute their like activism or advocacy in the Cheltenham community. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? If not, I think we can close now.
So we just want to thank all of the people who came out today, any school board members, faculty, all of the people who participated in the panel. We want to thank Mr. Metcalf for helping us with the mechanics of creating this ambassador student civics showcase. Like, we've had a lot of people come out today and it's been really wonderful to just have this conversation, and we really appreciate everybody. So just thank you.
Shout out to our student council sponsors, Coach Nace and Mr. Festuca, for letting us host events like this and supporting us in doing so. And thank you again to everyone who has come and supported us, especially school board members who have listened to our concerns and hopefully will use that in making decisions about our school, and community members and everyone else. We hope you have a great night.